You're listening to the Weekly Brew.
Thanks so much for joining us, Diamond. Really appreciate it. I've always said to people that have followed me that you are the guy for Golden State news, and if they're not following you, then they are an idiot, and they need to fix that immediately. So just kind of in a nutshell, I mean, this season has everybody talking. You've got old-timers weighing in like Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant. Basically, anyone who has an opinion about basketball has something to say about the Golden State Warriors. What is it about this season? Is it the quest for the record here? Is it the way Steph Curry is playing? What has everyone talking about this team?
I think it's a combination of the two things that you mentioned. You know, the Warriors have been so good this season, and they're doing it in such a unique way. You know, with Steph Curry playing out of his mind, and he's such a unique player that I think a lot of people can't fathom it. You know, that they're not quite sure what to make. The Warriors, you know, are they a fluke? Are they a team that relies too much on the jump shot? You know, a lot of those theories got disproved last year, and this year the way they've come out and dominated, I think it's cause for a lot of people that have followed the NBA for a long time to maybe revisit a lot of their previously held beliefs about how the game works, how the league works, and you know, I think a lot of the former players really still can't believe the sight, and you know, they have to maybe find a way to kind of explain what's going on.
So for our listeners, this interview is taking place on the Thursday, on the eve of you know, one of the biggest games of the season for them. Obviously, they have to go perfect here the rest of the way to get that 73 win record and take over the Bulls 72 win record. So obviously, that's a crucial game here. But you know, a lot of chatter in the sports blogosphere has been about, has chasing this record been to the detriment of this team's championship chances? And you're around the team as much as anyone. I mean, has that energized them? Has that pushed them? Has that actually worked against them this season? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, in recent days, while the Warriors have lost two recent home games, they've talked about how it's kind of been a burden for them. You know, all the media questions, all the extra attention. It's incredibly mentally taxing to go through an NBA season as it is, and I think you add on the record chase, and you know, it's just another thing. So I think these guys are struggling at this moment that we're speaking, and you know, right now they're trying to find their way back, and you know, in some ways I don't think they're worried too much about the record. It's kind of on the back burner right now because they do have a couple games against San Antonio, twice in 4 days they see each other. So I think that the record is important to them, but I think they also understand that, hey, like, it takes a lot to get there, not just physically but mentally as well.
So a lot of the talk with the guys kind of sort of piping up about this team. Pippen said that the Bulls would sweep the Warriors, and I think Horace Grant said any of the 6 championship teams would sweep the Warriors. I mean, you watch a lot of basketball. Is there any truth to those claims? If you kind of pit it in like a fantasy sense, you know, this year's team against those teams of yore, how would they stack up?
Well, I think, you know, you go back to what Steve Kerr said. It's really difficult to compare, and Steve Kerr would be the one who would know, right? Since he has the intimate knowledge of both teams. And I don't think he's wrong in saying that it's hard to tell because the rules are different. I know it sounds like small potatoes, but when you're talking about hand checking and illegal defense and things back then that aren't applicable now, the game has changed for sure, in part due to the rules, in part just due to the evolution of players as well. So, you know, back then there weren't a whole lot of, you know, three-pointer shot in terms of an emphasis on that. And the Warriors have changed the game with that. They've gone out and done it. So, you know, maybe that's a way of not answering the question. I don't know, but it's so difficult to tell. Certainly the 95-96 Bulls are well within their right to believe that they would sweep the Warriors. You know, I wouldn't really expect anything otherwise just because of how confident that group was. And, you know, I bet you if you ask some of the Warriors, they might in their heart of hearts think that too. Going the other way. So it's one of those things where I think these guys have the utmost confidence in their own teams, and you know, it reflects in those comments. But I think it's something that obviously is a hypothetical and we'll never find out. But you know, I think what's been lost is maybe kind of a celebration of both teams and how good both teams were in their respective eras.
You talk about the evolution of players. My thought, just as a human being observing sports, is that over time, sports medicine gets better, diets get better, routines in terms of practice become better. Doesn't it stand to reason, and doesn't it pass the eye test that over time teams do get better? I don't understand this, reliance on the past or having to prop up the past. It seems like maybe to me, a lot of teams playing in the NBA right now could beat the teams from 95, 96, even though they were historically great in their own era. I mean, is that sensible?
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. I mean, there's obviously more of an emphasis on ball movement now, on different kind of more advanced concepts. At the same time, if you look at today's game, there's a lack of maybe that dominant big man for a lot of those teams. So it would be interesting to see how ball movement versus just incredibly dominant big men would work. I think you would have good arguments on both sides as to why each would be successful. But yeah, I mean, the game has changed to where you're dealing with more versatile defenders. You're dealing with obviously better conditioned athletes, and you have all these kind of monitoring systems that can track every single movement that these guys make. So I think there's more knowledge about the game and physical activity in general. So yeah, I mean, I think this era would have a certain advantage over the old era just from that standpoint. But again, I do think it's hard to tell as well.
So we're a Houston-based podcast. A lot of our listeners are in Houston, and we are just playing out the stringer. I think we just dropped underneath 50% in terms of making the playoff odds. So there's not a lot to celebrate here in terms of Houston basketball. One thing a lot of people are talking about is Kevin Durant's free agency. Will we be able to get him? He has some friends on the team. But there's also been some talk about him going somehow to the Golden State Warriors, which I don't even understand. Is that a distinct possibility? I mean, if you had to analyze that situation there, what do you think Kevin Durant's likely to do with his future? Might he become a part of the Golden State organization?
I think it's a pretty decent possibility. Maybe it's hard to fathom, but I think when you look at the new salary cap and the way teams can create space to add new contracts, it should be interesting what happens. I mean, first of all, he's got to decide that he's going to leave Oklahoma City, and then second of all, he's obviously got to find the spot for him, and I think he has a lot of control there. But yeah, the Warriors have some moving parts. It'll be interesting to see what happens if the Warriors go all the way, win the championship, maybe even set the record. Do you break up? And they're going to have to do some breaking up. Do you break up the best team of all time? And the best team of all time can age as well. There's players over 30 that might not fit with the Warriors in the ultra long term, whereas a guy like Durant is a younger star and very much would. But it should be interesting to see what he first decides, and then I think it'll be an interesting kind of a wild process from there.
Speaking of stars, Steph Curry, obviously the face of that franchise, and in many ways, kind of the face of basketball for a lot of young fans now. He's certainly a very visible figure and beloved in some circles, although obviously old-timers have things to say about him, like Oscar Robertson in particular. But a lot of the scuttlebutt is, should we move the three-point line? I seem to recall, Tiger Woods, when he was really killing the ball, people were saying, do we need to change golf courses? There's always these kinds of things about that sort of dominance. But, I mean, put it in perspective. Is there a reasonable vote for another MVP candidate this season other than Steph Curry?
I don't believe so. There's already some debate as to whether or not he'll get a unanimous first place MVP vote. I don't believe that he will, just because there's so many different media members from all walks and all geographic locations voting on this thing. I believe there's roughly 130 votes. It'd be surprising to me. It's kind of one of those things where it'd be surprising to me if he were unanimous, and it'd also be surprising to me who else would not vote Steph Curry. I'm curious to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting the divergent paths that the teams have taken, because James Harden last year and here in Houston was a legitimate choice for MVP, I think, and came in second, and then the players voted him the MVP, and then what a ridiculous turnaround it has been this season. But I think a lot of ways, I think Jerry Reinsdorf is the one that said that organizations win championships, and obviously Michael Jordan didn't care for that perspective much, but I think that is true. And the Golden State organization seems interesting, particularly right at the top of the ownership there, Joe Lacob. I mean, what's been your experience kind of dealing with them and their mentality? Because they have in some ways revolutionized the game. So what are some ways they've been progressive, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, Joe Lacob is, for those that aren't familiar with him, is kind of a venture capitalist who made his own way, helped build numerous companies and made his fortune that way. And really, he's brought that kind of same mentality to the Warriors. From top to bottom, he reimagined the way the organization works. He brought in really intelligent, hardworking people to work for the organization after so many years of just kind of a downtrodden franchise. And he really kind of he didn't necessarily part ways with a lot of the current team employees, but he certainly reevaluated a lot of them. There were a lot of people that left the organization, a lot of people that were fired as well. And, in a lot of ways, he's brought in many different voices that have contributed to what the current Warriors team that you see now. From Jerry West, a guy that's been so well respected, and brought in Bob Myers first as an assistant GM, and who eventually rose up to the GM spot, a former agent who made his way in that path, and then now is the reigning executive of the year. So he's brought in a lot of loud voices in the room with strong opinions, smart people, and he kind of lets them go at each other. And what falls out is really a lot of opinions, and they in the end make the call. And you saw that come to a head with the decision not to trade Klay Thompson for Kevin Love, and that ended up being the right decision. And I think you're seeing the Warriors benefit from that right now.
I think that Steve Kerr, ultimately the right decision as well, which I don't know if that was a unanimous choice at the time, but he has proven to be really valuable to this team, as has Luke Walton. And interestingly enough, as I understand it, they're both on the ballot this year for Coach of the Year. Is that right?
I actually haven't seen it yet. I haven't gone in mine, but that's pretty interesting because it'll be interesting how that vote plays out, and I'm not certain if that's if it's a vote for either or both, or how that works.
It split them into two. It's actually they're two separate categories, so you cannot vote for both simultaneously. So to me, it seems like a weird move on the NBA's part to not award Walton the victories while Kerr was gone, but then to pit them against each other on the ballot.
Right, and then they end up splitting votes, and and I do think like there are a lot of other great candidates who are going to end up winning that vote. But yeah, it should be interesting to see how that changes the numbers.
Luke Walton, I guess, has been discussed for a number of positions that are likely to open up or are open. And what is your sense, just in terms of talking to the team, being around them? Is he going to stick around for the foreseeable future?
I think he's certainly going to, obviously have a lot of interest, and he'll definitely look into it. And I think then comes the decision. Do you leave one of the great franchises for what obviously will be a lucrative job for him? That's kind of the question, and I don't think anybody knows right now. I don't think he knows, because he's going to have to sit down and listen to the front office, to management, sell him on these jobs, and he's going to have to weigh, hey, I think he's ready for the position. At the same time, he's also a young coach who's still learning the game, and would admit to that as well. So it'll be interesting how he values Golden State's current success versus, hey, going out and running his own show. So he's going to have a lot of interest. You've got teams, like the New York Knicks, who, obviously have a connection with Luke through Phil Jackson. There's going to be other possibilities for him as well. So it'll play itself out, and I'm curious to what will happen as well.
So our listeners will have the benefit of having seen tonight's game. We obviously do not. But regardless of how that game goes, the next two games they play against them, they're almost certainly going to face each other in the playoffs. I think the entire basketball world will be disappointed if they don't. So the San Antonio Spurs, overlooked somewhat this season. They're also having an incredible season just because of what Golden State is doing. But, how do you head-to-head assess these teams over a 7-game series, which we're very likely to see?
Well, it'll be very interesting how the matchups play out. You saw in the first two games some different nuances take place. In the first game, Tim Duncan didn't play, and the Warriors won by 30. In the second game, Andrew Bogut didn't play, and the Warriors barely lost, especially in their minds. The Warriors came out of that second game very confident in terms of understanding that, hey, they were down Andrew Bogut. They were on the road, a place that they don't play well is at San Antonio. They haven't won a regular season game there in, 30-some-odd tries. I think they came away from that knowing that, hey, if certain plays had gone their way down the stretch, they would have won. And, they felt good coming out of that one. The first game obviously stuck in San Antonio's minds. They made adjustments. They stuck a Danny Green on Steph Curry, and Steph Curry ended up having not his best shooting night, one of the worst probably this season that I recall. And they made the adjustment from having a Kawhi Leonard, matchup on Curry, in which Curry dominated, in that first matchup. So it's going to be kind of a lot of moving parts, and I'm curious to see what will happen tonight, because it'll possibly set the tone for what happens later on.
Well, we are all certainly very excited to see that series, which almost certainly is going to happen this season, and that is the route to the championship for sure. Well, Diamond, I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for joining us. As I said before, anybody who's not following you on Twitter should definitely do so, especially if they're fans of basketball. How can readers find your work and find you on Twitter?
They can follow me on Twitter at Diamond83, and they can always read my coverage at the San Jose Mercury News, Bay Area News Group. So appreciate the time. Appreciate you having me.